Let's proceed further with the next session. The next session is on country experiences on sustainable energy transition. And I welcome all of you once again who are present in person as well as on Zoom. The next session will share perspectives and country experiences of sustainable energy transition from India, China, Indonesia, South Africa, United States of America, Germany, and the United Kingdom. It will also deliberate key challenges and opportunities for enabling just transition in G20 countries. May I please request a session chair, Mr. Alok Kumar, former Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India, to please come on the dais. Please give a big round of applause, everyone. Next, we have our co-chair, Mrs. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRADE, United Arab Emirates. Ma'am, please come on the dais. Please welcome Dr. Anbu Mozi Venkatachalam, Director of Research Strategy and Innovation for IRIA Indonesia. Dr. Ajay Rastogi, Chairman, Task Force Sustainable Just Transition, Jharkhand, India. And Dr. Jim Skia, Professor, Sustainable Energy at Imperial College, London, United Kingdom, is here virtually with us. Yes, please. Anshuman, can you please check if Dr. Jim Skia is there with us virtually? Done. Yes, please. Thank you. Fine.
Good afternoon, everybody. We now intend to start this session. So I will request all the participants to kindly take seat and so that we can start without any further delay. So we are starting this session on country experiences in sustainable energy transition. I'm very happy to introduce my co-panelists. The co-chair of the session is Mrs. Gauri Singh. She is Deputy Director General of International Renewable Energy Agency. We are joined by Dr. Jim Iski. He is a professor sustainable energy at Imperial College London, UK. I have Dr. Anbu Muzi Venkatachalam, who is from Economic Research Institute for Asia and East Asia, Jakarta, Indonesia. And we are also joined by Shri Ajay Rastogi, who represents Jharkhand, and he has been expert in the energy transition issues and climate related issues in Jharkhand. So what I propose that we will all speak for about 10 to 12 minutes each. And thereafter, we will take some question answers. And maybe after the question answers, I will ask each of the co-panelists for giving maybe 2 to 3 suggestions which we can forward to the G20 from this session. Before I make my presentation, thank you. Before I make this presentation, let me make few initial comments. So, we have been working for this energy transitions working group in the Ministry Power for about almost full 1 year. And in my presentation, I will share with you the issue note, the key priorities of India's presidency, which we have put on the table for discussions. And also what are the key features of the draft communique which is being negotiated. What I have realized as the chair of this ETWG in first 3 meetings, that two major things. First, G20 process is very important, but it is extremely complex and slow because the country perspectives which come during discussions and during negotiations, they are very, very divergent. But this process is very, very important for success of energy transition in the world, because there are most of the countries which matter. It is also very important that India is the presidency, because India's position in the global energy consumption is very dominant. India is currently third largest consumer of energy in the world. And by the projections we have with us, in the next 20 years, it will overtake US and it will become second largest energy consumer in the world. The other 2 countries, US and China, their absolute energy consumption will not grow much. Most of the growth in energy demand will come from India and these 3 countries. So whatever we do or whatever we don't do is going to impact energy transition. And one other important fact which we should keep in mind is that India has one of the lowest per capita energy consumption in the globe. So it is legitimate aspiration that it has to become what the goal it has set for it, that it wants to become a developed world by 2047. So these are the complexities that India is a very dominant energy consumer. It is going to grow very fast in terms of energy consumption, and its path to become a developed world, its growth, energy growth will grow. So there are two very difficult aspects which India will have to handle. Say energy growth for its development, as well as also managing energy transition so that it contributes more than its share in the global endeavor, global efforts for energy transition. So it was very, very interesting and very, very important that India is now the presidency. It brings the perspective of the global south. Most of the countries in the global south are developing countries. They will consume more energy. So what do they think and how to perceive the imperatives of energy transition is going to influence the G20 process, not only now, in the subsequent years also, as the Brazil and all that take the presidency. Another very important thing which emerged in the whole discussion is the almost consensus on need of multiple pathways. It is not one size fits all. That earlier there was so much of talk and emphasis on the phasing out of coal, but all during the conversations and discussions in our group, there is a consensus that every country will have its own pathway, and world will have multiple pathways. One last thing which I make in my remarks before I come to my presentation is the growth for India will turn out to be a boon for energy transition, because it is far more difficult to switch to other energy sources when demand is not growing, because you have to replace your systems. India will have golden opportunity of managing its energy transition through its growth. You can do the new technologies, new sources of energy for the energy which you require now and future. So there won't be so much of pressure on replacing your existing energy assets. But it would be ultimately the leadership which will decide the success or otherwise of energy transition. Most of us are all democracies. Whatever we commit on the table, when you go back to our countries, our leaders have to convince their domestic constituencies about the imperatives of energy transition, the costs that is going to impose on your growth and your economy. You have to manage not only the technology and finance, you have to also manage the domestic constituencies, because there will be many gainers and many losers. Some new players will gain in terms of the new energy sources, new energy projects, but many others will be the losers who are already in this energy business. So let me quickly share with you what is all going in the G20 Energy Transitions Working Group. This is, most of it is known, that how important is G20 process for success of any economic process and also the energy transition. I will draw your attention to the right side of the slide, the 6 priorities which Indian presidency brought on the table. And this was also a work which was done out of the multiple ministries in India which are working in the area of energy transition. So we had our own internal processes. First was energy transition through addressing technology gaps. I will deal with each of them subsequent slides for 1 minute each. Low cost finance for energy transition. Mr. Tarun Kupra is speaking, energy security and diversified supply chain. So India made a priority of energy security, energy efficiency, industrial low carbon transitions and responsible consumption, fuels for future. And last but not the least, universal access to clean energy and just, affordable and inclusive energy transition pathways. As I mentioned, that Ministry of Power is steering this group, working group, but there is significant contribution from MNRE, Ministry of Coal, Ministry of Petrol Natural Gas, Ministry of Mines, and Niti Aayog. 3 meetings have already been held at Bengaluru, Gandhinagar, and Mumbai, and the last meeting is scheduled to be held in Goa. We have also organized so far 12 side events which have been hugely attended by academia, by industry, by experts, and of course the delegation members, ranging from the CCUS to SMR, biofuels. The list is very long. Offshore wind. So offshore wind, and in Goa also we have lined up 5 more side events. India has invited 9 countries as guest countries in the G20 process in the Energy Transition Working Group. And we had also had the benefit of the viewpoints and presentations of 14 international organizations. Another key feature of India's presidency in ETWG was the taking up the global studies. In all 13 global studies, 8 have been completed. And this is a list of the global studies which have been completed, like low-cost finance for energy transition. MNRE is leading it, and it has been done with the cooperation of ARENA and so many institutions. Then number 3, addressing the vulnerability of supply chain of critical minerals. Ministry of Mines has led it. Many more are under pipeline. So these are the list of 13 studies. You can see the extent of coverage, biofuels, green hydrogen, everything. And so far, 8 studies which have been published are available on the website of Ministry of Power. And remaining 5 will also soon come. They are in the final stages. Talking of the focus areas, first is the addressing technology gaps. So we have identified 5 technologies. Some of them are commercially mature, so focusing on their deployment. And some other are emerging and new clean technologies. They include carbon capture, utilization, and storage, electrolyzers, small modular reactors, advanced chemistry cell, battery storage, high efficiency fuel cells. This group is also working very closely with the finance track. Our understanding has been that this group will throw up the demand of the low-cost finance for deploying these technologies, whereas the making available that finance will be the work area for the finance track. So we are coming out in this group with a broad estimate of the finance which will be required for if you want to deploy these technologies. The third priority is energy security and diversified supply chain. This is the key contribution, significant contribution of Indian presidency, that this has come up as a very major priority of this working group, that while we progress on energy transition, we have to do it in a way that it ensures energy security and diversified supply chains. I can share with you that India's action plan for avoiding 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions between 2020 and 2030, we had prepared a action plan, and half of it will come from energy efficiency, other half will come from renewables. That is the broad say contribution of 2 sides. So India's presidency has taken in a very significant manner, very important manner, the area of energy efficiency, industrial low carbon transitions, that is hard to abate sectors, And we have also added responsible consumption to reflect our priority of life, that is lifestyle for environment. It is not only energy efficiency, it is also our how do we consume energy and how to control demand. The fifth priority is the fuels for future. We have taken up 2 fuels from Indian presidency side for building consensus. One is the sustainable biofuels, and other is the renewable and low carbon hydrogen. Earlier we started with green hydrogen, but the current consensus seems to come down to renewable and low carbon hydrogen and its derivatives like green ammonia. And the sixth priority area is the universal access to clean energy. India's leadership, it stands for ensuring the energy access to all, including large number of people in African continent and also in all other countries, to ensure that we have the energy transition which is just, affordable and inclusive. I'll spend these few minutes on these 2 slides. What is the significant addition from presidency? Because all these communique are the continuum. Say each country, when it says that, okay, in my presidency, this was the consensus. So you have to build upon this. So it is not a fresh slate. So I've listed out the significant additions which India is trying to build in the communique. First, we are going to acknowledge that new technologies by name. It is not general that technology, new technology by name, like CCUS, these 5 I've already listed. The intention is that once you identify a technology in G20 communique, energy ministerial communique, we were told and that the lenders, the bankers, they have greater confidence in funding those technologies. This is going to be the contribution of this endeavor. Global Alliance for Biofuel has already been announced in the recent visit of Honorable Prime Minister to US. And this is being spearheaded by our Ministry of Petrol and Natural Gas, because there are some reservations, some countries like UK, it says we have to add sustainable biofuels because they have their concern on food security and other things. But it is emerging that biofuel is going to be the one big fuel for future, as Mr. Tarun Kapoor was also talking in the morning, that for our transport and for our cooking needs, the biofuels are going to be significant. Another important significant addition is going to be a wide recognition that renewable energy will play an important role, very significant role, to accelerate universal energy access for developing countries. And even within the renewable energy, the decentralized systems will be far more important. So there are going to be several initiatives for enhancing the knowledge and technology of DREs in India's presidency. The last bullet on the slide, the 4th bullet, is one which assumes a special significance in the context of a national green hydrogen mission. So there is not much consensus on the word green hydrogen. They say don't color the hydrogen, don't label the hydrogen. So we have come down to this. We have now going to almost agree to the renewable and low carbon hydrogen, but they need to define it. And it is the most contentious area in the whole negotiation, because somebody is very happy with even the hydrogen produced from the natural gas, but it emits as high as around 11 kg of carbon dioxide for 1 kg of hydrogen, whereas the renewable hydrogens are less than life cycle. If you compare life cycle carbon emission, it is less than 2 kgs of carbon dioxide per kg of hydrogen. So what India is trying to build consensus around is there's a need of a harmonized global standard for defining the low carbon hydrogen. And this standard is most likely is going to be the carbon emissions you produce for producing one kilogram of hydrogen. But what would be the number? 2 kilo, 3 kilo, 4 kilo? That is proving to be difficult. But this will be a major achievement for India, that there is a global consensus, okay, that there's need to be a standard, and the standard has to be the parameter has to be in terms of the emissions per kilogram of hydrogen. So that is one important thing which India is likely to achieve. There was talk in the morning about the regional integration. I'm very happy that this is already one priority which we had started in September last year, and this has got almost universal acceptance in the ETWG meetings. The crucial role of the transnational grid interconnections and cross-border power system integration in enhancing energy security, fostering economic growth, and facilitating the global transition to low carbon energy future. This is very good news for energy professionals in India. We are also trying to build consensus on a roadmap for doubling the rate of improvement in energy efficiency globally by 2030 and technology co-development in hard-to-abate sector. The third bullet I have already mentioned is the encourage people to adopt responsible and needful consumption habits by promoting awareness and advocating for behavioral change. Everybody has to be conscious the available carbon budget is very limited. The scientists, the experts, they tell us that for limiting to 1.5 degrees C, it could be 2028 or 2030. The carbon budget is going to be over at the current rate of consumption and the emissions. And for 1.5 degrees C, it is going to be over by 2035. And nowhere we see the roadmaps which were being talked. Clarity of technology is not certain, finance is not available. So the best glimmer of hope for all of us for achieving the net zero is going to be that we have to move towards responsible and full consumption so that our energy demands come down. That is one very important element which India's presidency is going to bring. And last is the evolve a roadmap for low-cost finance for energy transition and enable support for developing de-risking mechanisms required for attracting private investments to bring economic feasibility in technologies such as offshore wind, battery energy storage, green hydrogen, and CCUS. One word for battery energy storage, I can tell you, India's power sector cannot complete its energy transition, say, in the next 2-3 decades unless until we bring down the cost of battery energy storage. The scope for the flexible operation of coal-based power plants, the scope for developing pumped storage power plants is limited, and we'll exhaust most of it by 2030 or 2032. If you have to move beyond 2032 or for energy transition, for increasing the share of renewables, it has to come from the battery energy storage, and we have to bring down the cost of energy storage. Currently, it is more than 10 rupees a unit. It is not affordable. So somebody in the inaugural session was talking of a clear pathway. I think Professor who joined virtually, I wanted to intervene. Okay, this pathway is not possible because technology path is not clear, that which technology will succeed and which will become affordable. So it will have to be a gradual transition. However, we may be concerned. That's all from my side. Thank you very much. I will now. Now I have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Gauri Singh. She brings more than 30 years of experience in policy advocacy and project implementation in the field of renewable energy and sustainable development, both from India and internationally. And she has had a long career in the field of renewable energy and sustainable development. So I now request Mrs. Gauri Singh to make her presentation. Yes.
Thank you so much, Alok Kumarji. And thank you to IRADE, to ma'am and to sir to give me this opportunity of presenting some of my thoughts on the energy transition. I think the inaugural session and what we heard from Alok Kumarji pretty much sets the stage for getting us a fairly good comprehension of where and how we need to go. I mean, maybe the how is not so clear, but at least where we need to go. And what I want to start with is maybe just spend just 1 minute to give you a global picture, which is optimistic at one level, but it does come with certain areas of concern. So last year, as some of you would have heard, globally we added almost 300 gigawatts of renewable energy in both in the grid and in the direct use, and this represented almost 83% of the capacity additions that happened, and bringing our total renewables in the power generation capacity to almost 40%. And anyway, I think all of us know also about the huge declines in costs that have happened in renewable energy. And it didn't just end with the last decade that had seen very rapid decreases, but we also saw very good year-on-year decreases in LCOE in both solar and in the wind, even last year, despite all the issues around supply chains and other related issues that had happened. So, but one of the things that's also clear is that most of this deployment is happening at very limited geographies. So it's concentrated in China, US, EU. So they account for almost 75% of the deployment. And when we speak about investments, which have also again reached a global high of 1.3 trillion US dollars, with renewables and energy efficiency almost about 700 billion, which is also very real high, again, despite all the inflationary pressures on labor and all. But despite all of this, what we are also seeing is that the electrification with renewables in the hard to abate sector, the end use sector, is going very slow. And there's an increasing gap in investments between the global north and the global south. And this gap is actually widening. In fact, if I just look at sub-Saharan Africa, it just received less than 1.5% of the total global flows. So obviously, when we talk about a global energy transition, or even if we talk about energy transition in the context of even the G20 countries, not all countries are moving at the same pace, nor are they being able to attract investments and financial flows at the rates and at the cost that is needed. I'll just spend some time speaking about 3 regions, and these are 3 regions which I think are important because they have countries in the G20 that have provided leadership in the recent years. So ASEAN, which has Indonesia, which has provided leadership just in the last G20. I'll also speak about the Latin America, where we will have we'll move towards the next G20 happening in Brazil, and also talk a little bit about Africa. I think we've already heard from the earlier presentations a very comprehensive picture of where we are going in terms of the Indian context. So in the ASEAN, and I know that we will have panelists who will be speaking on Indonesia, but just giving you a sense of where the ASEAN is growing. This is a region with 10 countries where we are likely to see rapid economic growth and over the next few decades. And This will be driven both by growth in population, but also in the energy demand. And currently, the energy supply in these 10 countries is dominated by over 85% of the primary energy supply is fossil fuel. So it's really at a crossroad of which direction this region will go, which is going to be a region of high growth and high demand. And it can either go in the path, which I hope it doesn't, of continued reliance on fossil fuel, because that's not the path you want these countries to take. But alternatively, it could also choose to harness the huge amount of renewable energy that this region is home to. And if you look at where this the ASEAN region was in by the end of 2018, it had almost 28% of its 252 gigawatts that it consumes coming from renewable sources, mostly hydropower. And this has by last year increased to about 33%. So the region itself had put a very ambitious target for itself for having 23% of its primary energy coming from renewable energy by 2025, and also a 35% share of renewable energy in installed capacity. Now, its share in the installed capacity might still happen because it's close to 33% now. But in terms of renewables accounting for 23% of the primary energy, I think it's very far from reaching there, because it's stagnating at around 14%, and it's been doing that for almost the last 7-8 years. So because power sector, as you know, is one of the dominant sources that leads to higher emissions. So there is a large amount of focus on replacing coal in that region, and a number of countries have also signed up in the COP26, Glasgow COP26, on moving away from coal. But if you're looking at the broad narrative that's emerging from the ASEAN countries, it is a group of countries that are extremely focused on higher, getting a higher rate of industrialization happen, and it is what seems to be emerging is that this is an opportunity for the ASEAN countries to look at renewable sources, green this industrialization process as they move along this trajectory for energy transition. In the short run, solar PV and electric vehicles will play a very major role. By 2030, we expect that the region would have installed nearly 280 gigawatts of solar and put almost 13 million electric vehicles on the road. And that would enable the region to meet the own aspirations that they have set for themselves, but also be able to move forward in the energy transition and towards net zero targets that they have also put their statements out for. Transmission and distribution will definitely need expansion, and I'll talk a little bit more on the grids, which is pretty much the invisible sector. Not much gets talked about it, but extremely important. Let me move to the Latin American countries, which are much more developed. They have about 95% electrification. So in terms of access to electricity, they're much more well developed. They have good electricity markets, and but there is a huge reliance of these countries on hydropower. Brazil, in fact, because of its huge Iguazu power project and the other hydropower projects that it has pretty much shifted the energy mix of the region more towards hydro. So the big challenge now with the climate change that's happening is about the impact that climate change will have on the hydro reserves and resources. And which is why if you're looking at the big narrative that comes through from the Latin American countries, it's about diversification of the energy mix. These are countries that they have huge energy resources, both fossil and renewables. And they also play a very important role as producers of oil and gas. In fact, oil accounts for a much higher share of total primary energy supply compared to the other regions of the world. And it's mainly being used for transport. And the other sector that uses up a lot of energy is their industry, which by nature of the industry, which is more extractive. And that's very energy intensive. So the big discussion that's happening is on two fronts: how to use hydropower sources that are already being harnessed as being able to bring in more renewable energy into the grid, because these are really the assets that can provide for the storage and flexibility in the grid system. The other thing is that this is also a region which has very well interconnected grids. In fact, Central America has some of the best interconnected grids, which are also very capable of having they've created a fairly deep market for electricity because of the nature that it is, and because of which it has been attracting huge amounts of investments. In fact, in 2019, the clean energy investments in the region hit about 18 billion. So it gets about 6 to 7% of the total world renewable energy investments. And you have Brazil, Chile, who are Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, who really lead in getting investments into the region. And most of the procurement is actually done through auctions. So it's in that sense, there is some level of certainty because there's ahead planning that goes into it. And mostly it's coming into the wind, now into solar PV, and also biofuels. Another very interesting characteristic of this region is the depth of the financial institutions, the public financial institutions. And that's a very important, and they've played a very important role in being able to attract investments. If you're looking at how these have been instrumental in channeling investments into the development of domestic markets in Chile, in Honduras, Nicaragua, and Mexico, but they've also been able to attract investments in creating local value chains. Brazil and Uruguay are good examples. And most importantly, have also been able to attract investment by putting conditionalities of local content and local labor. So created jobs. So this has been a very important facet of the way the Latin American countries have actually moved into getting more renewables into the grid, but also in their pathways for the future for getting more investments for more renewables as they move forward for the energy transition. Now, very quickly, I'll just spend a couple of minutes also on what the African context is. And in Africa, as we know, that the narrative has to be the development narrative. If you say energy transition, I think most of the countries and the leaders and the policymakers take a lot of offense, because they pretty much ask you transition from what? Because it's a continent that and especially the sub-Saharan Africa is the electrification rate is only about 46%, and there are almost 1 billion people who lack access to clean cooking fuels and technologies. So it has to be a development narrative that will drive the energy transition in countries in Africa. What's also important is that while the grid electricity, that's the most attractive format, and we see that most of the countries are very eager to get more capacities in the grid. But what's also becoming very clear is a lot of the countries have higher generation capacity than the transmission and distribution capacity. So a number of countries in Africa are actually capable of generating more electricity than they're capable of transmitting and distributing, which is obviously a huge bottleneck. And we all know that grid planning and gestation is anywhere between 5 to 7 years. So distributed renewables will definitely have to play a very major role, and they also link in well with the development imperative of providing access to energy, to productive needs, to education, to healthcare, and also meeting the SDG goals. And it's not surprising that the investment that has come into Africa it has been, as I said, was 1.5% of the global flows in 2020. But if I just break it down, 90% of this actually got moved into a very few countries in Africa. So it went to countries in North Africa, it went to Kenya, Tanzania, and to South Africa. So again, if you're looking at Central Africa or even West Africa, the investments that went into renewable energy were almost negligible. So there is, of course, this divide within how the countries are moving in Africa in terms of their own capacities to attract investment and to be able to get capacities deployed. But it's also getting reflected in terms of the divide between private sector funding and public sector funding. Because again, if you're looking at the big recipients of private capital, they have been Southern and North Africa. The others have had to rely much more on public sector financing. And China was the largest lender, followed by some of the multilateral development banks like African Development Bank, World Bank, and GCF. But still, if you're looking at the absolute numbers of money that's going in Africa, it's really very small. And what we've seen is in the recent years, it has declined even more. So clearly, this reflects that the challenge. I think this is another angle that needs to be added to the complexity of energy transition as we see it, that it's not just how countries will manage it within the country itself, which is in itself a very complicated process, because it involves getting, energy transition has to be an economy-wide transition. It cannot be just a transition in the power sector, but looking at how industries will make the transition, how buildings will become more efficient, and how the industry will also reduce its emission. Just a couple of points before I end. The grids have always been an invisible element in this whole whole narrative, and whenever we speak, it's much more about deployment. And grids will also involve or need nearly 600 billion US dollars on annually, both in terms of expansion of the network, but also in terms of flexibility measures that will need to be put in as more variable renewables comes in. Finally, I think, the whole paradigm around international cooperation has to change. It cannot be the way international cooperation has happened in the past few years, which, we also heard from Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the 100 billion has never reached the developing countries. I mean, we think that international cooperation would need to focus much more on getting an aggregation at a regional level. We also heard in the inaugural session how important regional integration and regional planning and action is, as also looking at low cost of financing, mitigating the risk that the private sector will not pick up, which is essentially the country risk and also the currency risk. That would need to be picked up by financial intermediaries like the MDB and others. Because these risks are preventing the capital flows to moving to the developing countries. Finally, I think, with the way the G20 communique is coming out, I think a lot more focus has to be on universal access to affordable and clean energy, as is also clear from the communique. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gauri Singh ji. It was very rich and very informative intervention. Now, we have got around 30 minutes left for this session, so we'll have to really manage our time. So I will request the other speakers to maybe limit their interventions in the about 9 to 10 minutes, so that we have some time for discussion also. I now have pleasure to invite Professor Jim Miskey, who has joined us virtually. He is a professor of sustainable energy at Imperial College London, and he has research interests in energy, climate change, and technological innovation. He is co-chair of IPCC Working Group 3rd. So I hand over to Professor Jim Miskey. Please, Professor, you can make your intervention, please.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning from London, and good afternoon to you in Delhi. And thanks for the invitation to participate in this session. I've actually known Jyoti and Karit Parikh for a long time, so it's a pleasure to catch up with them, even if it is virtually. I'm going to focus my remarks around the idea of a just transition, and I'm going to build on two roles that I currently fulfill. First, internationally, as the current co-chair of Working Group 3 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on Mitigation, but secondly, as chair of a government-appointed Just Transition Commission in my native Scotland. So taking IPCC first, the last Working Group 3 report, and I should acknowledge at this point my fellow co-chair of Working Group 3, Professor Shukla from Ahmedabad University in India. The report came out just over a year ago, and it was scoped following the inclusion of just transition in the preamble to the Paris Agreement, but just before the concept was put on the map by the Polish presidency at COP24. The phrase does not actually appear in the scoping document of the Working Group 3 report, but we brought it in under the banner of equity considerations, most noticeably in a new chapter on mitigation and development pathways in the near to mid-term, which tied climate action very firmly to wider socioeconomic considerations and broader development goals. Now, at the time, the chapter noted that as of 2020, there were 7 national commissions in place on just transition, as well as 7 other sets of national policies and many other actors, networks, and just transition movements. It noted the German phase out of coal subsidies and subsidy reform packages in Iran, Namibia, Philippines, Turkey, and the UK, and a comprehensive programme in Spain, which covered early retirement for miners, redundancy packages, retraining for green jobs, and priority job placement for former miners. And it's very noticeable that these initiatives are all really related to the coal industry. Now, there's no precise definition for just transition, and local context absolutely matters. But the guidelines that have been set out by the International Labour Organization capture the main elements. And in the IPCC report, we identified a number of common elements to just transition action. So first of all, research and early assessment of the social and employment impacts of climate policies. And I would actually interpret that much more widely as the need for credible and informed forward planning. So really echoing Jeffrey Sachs' remarks in the first session about the importance of planning. Secondly, social dialogue and democratic consultation with social partners and stakeholders. The creation of decent jobs, active labour market policies and rights at work, and investments in establishing low emission and labour intensive technologies and centres. Realistic training and retraining programmes that lead to decent work, and economic diversification based on low carbon investments. Now, in fact, the world has moved faster than science has or IPCC has. We now have the so-called JETPs, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which can accelerate country-led energy transition through international cooperation by expanding access to public and private finance to support energy system investment needs. And these have been applied to South Africa so far, which is quite well advanced, moving on to Vietnam and perhaps other countries as well. And in the next IPCC cycle, which starts later this month, there will be an opportunity to assess the progress of these initiatives. But just a couple of personal observations on reference to just transition on the international stage. There was a subsidiary bodies meeting of the Climate Convention in Bonn last month, and many delegates there talked about the wider application of the just transition concept. Not just about coal, but about all energy supply, not just about energy supply, but also energy demand, and not just energy, but other sectors such as land use and agriculture. And going even further, not just about mitigation, but about adaptation to climate change as well, where the ILO principles could be applied. So it would be useful to get a sense of the boundaries of the concept. And just to say, there's also a risk, I feel, that the phrase is used as a kind of magic dust to sprinkle on energy transitions to make it appear easy and as if we've solved the problem. It is not easy. As my experience in Scotland shows, it's a really hard job to achieve the energy transition in a just way. So just a few words about the Scottish situation. The last coal-fired power station closed in Scotland about 7 years ago, and mining activity had ceased before that. Coal use is now in the rear view mirror, but the impacts of what was an unplanned and an unjust exit from coal are still to be seen in economically scarred communities with high levels of unemployment. So there are important lessons to be learned from their experience. And there are new challenges to be faced. Scotland has been a major offshore oil and gas producer. This is a mature province, the reserves are declining, and the country now has to face up new challenges, especially given the projected declines in oil and gas demand in scenarios compatible with the goals of the Paris Agreement. But at the same time, there are huge opportunities in the renewable sector, including repurposing skills that were developed for offshore oil and gas to apply them to offshore wind. And there will also be opportunities for the existing workforce to take up employment in carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. Now, with all these issues in mind, the Scottish Government established a Just Transition Commission in 2019, and I had the privilege of being appointed chair. And I'd like to flag that it's not a scientific body, so I'm not doing it as a professor of Imperial College or whatever. There have been a couple of academics involved, but it mainly engages businesses, trade unions, environmental groups, and community bodies. And it's very much about real jobs for real people and real communities. And that's a very healthy reminder for someone who's so heavily engaged with IPCC. I'll just say the Commission took a very early decision to take a broad view of just transition. We have a big issue of energy poverty in Scotland, so the demand side is also in. We have an unusually concentrated pattern of land ownership, and there are major equity challenges arising from tenant farming and the conversion of land from agriculture to forestry, for example. And the electrification of transport actually poses big challenges in rural areas. So the Commission identified 4 prerequisites for a just transition. First of all, pursuing an orderly, managed transition to net zero that creates benefits and opportunities. It needs to be a national mission. It's not just for government, it's for all stakeholders. And this really emphasizes the need for credible planning. And I emphasize credible because fantasy plans don't help anybody to make to plan their way forward. Second, equipping people with the skills and education they need to benefit from the transition. Third one is empowering and invigorating communities and strengthening local economies. It's all not at the national level. And finally, making sure that the benefits are shared widely and ensuring that any burdens are distributed on the basis of ability to pay. And this is particularly to address challenges faced by energy consumers. And just to say, we can make it all sound gloomy, but we're also to emphasize that there are big economic opportunities from the transition, not just risks, and a chance to address existing injustices, which every country has. We made a really important recommendation 2 years ago for the government to actually appoint a minister with a specific responsibility for just transition. And in the event, we now have a cabinet secretary whose portfolio covers net zero and just transition. And we have just transition sectoral plans under development in energy, in transportation, in buildings and construction, and in land use and agriculture. And in addition, we have a geographically focused just transition plan for the Grangemouth petroleum refinery and petrochemical complex, which really ties into hydrogen and CCS. So the machinery is there, but the challenges are great. Renewables jobs are less well rewarded. They're less well paid than those in oil and gas, and we have to face up to that. Many of the wind energy components are being imported rather than being manufactured locally. And this is leading to demands, for example, for trade unions for more requirements on local content has already been flagged. The cost of upgrading the country's poor housing stock is daunting, and people on lower incomes find it difficult, for example, to afford electric vehicles. And finally, farmers are challenged on multiple fronts by climate change itself, the conversion of land, which is driving up land prices, and by shifting dietary habits. Now, none of this is easy, but the basic elements of a just transition strategy, that's planning, reskilling and upskilling, engagement with communities and stakeholders, and attention to finance and the sharing of costs and benefits, will allow these difficult issues to be addressed in at least a systematic way. Whether you're an idealist or a realist, there's a good justification for a just transition. The pragmatic reason is unless we do this in a just way, we will not get the social acceptance and buy-in that we need to enable the transition to be made in the first place. And the principled reason is it's just the right thing to do at a moral level. So let's leave it, let me leave it on that high note.
Thank you very much. Within the time available, I think it was a very good presentation, very effective, and you gave us your shared experience of this setting up a full-time commission and a full-time minister for the importance of this transition. And I completely agree. You said what I was also saying, that unless until there is we manage our domestic constituencies, we will not reach where we want to reach in terms of the transition. It will not happen in G20 discussion tables. It will happen in democracies and with managing the local constituencies and their welfare. Very well said. Thank you very much, Professor. I hope that you will stay with us during the session. Now I have the pleasure to invite Dr. Venkatachalam Anbumuzi. He is the Director of Research and Strategy and Innovations at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, Indonesia. And he brings us a very rich experience in the policy and also the actual implementation. Yeah, Dr. Anbu. Yeah, your presentation was there with us yesterday. You mailed to us also. It was there before I made presentation. You have to go to
Thank you,
desktop.
Alokji, and it is my pleasure to be here and share some of the dilemmas and experiences of Indonesia in transition from the fossil fuel to the renewable. And yeah, the first one. Time is short, and basically there are three messages that is I would like to share, and one is yes, been reflected. This energy transition is a complex process, and it's costly, and sometimes it has a negative impact in the short term. But the second message is, and we don't need to be pessimistic, but there are opportunities, and that's opportunities comes in the co-benefits that comes with this energy transition if it is captured, and still we can make a kind of win-win situation. To make it win-win, and we need more cooperation. That is the cooperation at the region level and the international level, and this is what the story of Indonesia wants to share. And yes, as mentioned by Chair Alok Kumar Ji, and the dilemmas or the complexity of Indonesia is similar to India, and where this our aspirations and also this dilemmas is focusing on achieving. One is how we can achieve the energy security. Second thing is to contribute for the environmental targets. And third one is that equity, that is affordability. And with this aim, and basically that is in the COP28 Glasgow, and Indonesia went there, and with the hope that is more funding will be coming in. But what they got is a kind of a peer pressure to commit for more emission reductions or the zero carbon. And this has been reflected, and the last year it is Indonesia's presidency. They came up with this climate Bali Compact and also JET pay programs they agreed on, and there is a consistency and continuity. That is the Alok Kumar Ji mentioned, that is the priority areas where that is the high level consensus evolving. But from the developing South and from the Indonesian perspective, this energy transition need to be accelerated with this economic growth. And this needed disruptive innovations. That is a basic narrative or imperative of that is driving the energy transition. So if you look into the future by 2060, where it is Indonesia has committed for the net zero, and here our estimates say that is to achieve the net neutrality need more deployment of this renewable energy technologies, and here this country has a lot of opportunities for the solar PV and offshore wind, hydro, and geothermal biomass under the renewable energy sector, and we do have the nuclear and particularly small and modular reactors and the hydrogen. So the opportunities are huge. But the thing is how much it costs for this to achieving this net zero, and with this available at the same time, we cannot forget Indonesia is sitting on a high quality coal, and which is affordable. And then Indonesia is very much integrated with the global economy, and so the effectiveness of this economic competitiveness comes with the affordable and the cheap providing these energy resources at the scale it is needed. And this is a kind of a current policy instruments that is Indonesia is employing, and the core pillar is how that is energy sector is getting decarbonized, and they have been innovating. There is the proliferation of renewable energies are moving in, and through feed-in tariff mechanisms, and also there is indirect taxes on the fossil fuel. But still, if the cost effectiveness point of view, and still there is more focusing on the energy efficiency in the demand side management. And third one is also it is putting and a lot of effort on end-use fuel, particularly the EVs and the biofuels. It has been coming in, but not at the scale or not at the speed that has been required. And because most of the developing countries, including Indonesia, basically they are when coming to the R&D and the innovations, they are the second movers. And it is a hard to put the first time of investment, but there are opportunities. And another narrative, I think Alok Kumarji also mentioned, and it has been repeated by Mr. Gauri Singh, and one is that is the sustainable energy transition is very much linked to these HDIs and your quality of life. This shows that is, if you look into that Indonesia, it is very much basically it is 0.5 megawatt kilometer. And but if you look into these advanced economies, their per capita emission and also consumption is very high. And so it is a kind of a social justice and social equity issues. So what type of future electricity, that is the energy that is we are providing to them? So that is they need to achieve these high levels of HDI, and here the social justice issues comes in, and here the coal has its own, fossil fuel has its own narratives to tell. At the same time, for most of them, it is some of the households in the small islands of Indonesia, they don't have the access to the electricity. Around 13% doesn't have the access to the electricity. For them, the first access to the electricity could be clean and green. So this is a kind of impact study that is we did for Indonesia, and if they completely phase out to this coal, and by 2030, and by removing it, and we found it is going to impact, and this is their economic growth going to minus. I think it is when compared to the current level. And it has been reflecting. It is also, Indonesia is also exporting the coal. And if you are phasing out, it has been reflecting basically, and the current accounts balance may go minus 30%. And this has some hard implications on the small households. And also this electricity price we estimated, that is depending upon where these resources will be replaced by the renewables, it may go from plus 3.5 to 12.3, and so it has an implications on the economic competitiveness, and of course that is we have the positive implications on the emission reductions. Sorry, but there are stories that is we can learn from the countries. For example, it is a German story, and German when they come out of this Cold War, and when their economy is accelerating, and it is 90% dependent on the coal. And today, I think the last year they also achieved 100% renewable energy. But the transition from 90% to the 0% has an impact. And if you look into from the 1960 to 1980, their unemployment rate has been increased. Then it was flat, and then it reduced. So how that is German has achieved this kind of a social resilience? It is by their investment on the renewables, and also the new type of industries that they developed. And this is a kind of one message that is a developing South can link, and they can look into it. And that is how can we build a social resilience from moving from the fossil fuel to this renewable energy and achieving the maximum benefits. And so for in the case of Germany, and say they put a lot of the investment on the technological invention, not only on the technological invention, how these technological inventions are converted or transformed into a business model, and that is exported to the global needs. And this is where this revealed comparative advantages comes in. And if you look into it, and some of the pioneering technologies, and where this German stands for the Green Innovation Index, and also some of the new technologies in the storage and the road transport, they are leading the global. So once we are concentrating, moving from the fossil fuel to the renewable energy and transforming this renewable energy into an export model, still you can gain and you can win this battle of energy transition. So what could be the future pathways for the global south, taking into that is experiences of Indonesia? And here basically there are three ways. That is one is three principles. One is that effectiveness. And then here, this is renewable energy pathways need to be integrated. And as Madam mentioned about it, this grid interconnectivity and developing the renewables and integrating into the grid and transforming for the cross-border transfer. Here we can see a kind of a win-win situation within the regional level. And second thing is the efficiency and the equity. And where comes and here we calculated and what could be the cost for achieving the net zero. And here we find for Indonesia, that could be a positive concept. And in India's case, it's also the cost could be negative. But that how it could be coming in, basically developing. Now these carbon markets are evolving. And so this energy transition is linked to these carbon markets. Then we can successfully and partially we can bring the equity issues and the efficiency issues. Third one is for the developing countries like Indonesia and also in the India, and we need to be looking to the co-benefits of moving into, for example, developing the solar value chain and at the local level, at the regional level, will bring energy security at the state level, and also it can contribute for the air quality. So my takeaway here is that if you are thinking about the energy transition from a developing country perspective, particularly which country that has been rich in the coal resources, then that could not be a kind of a one solution or one way that is fit into all. Basically, it had to be a differentiated, but a common but a differentiated approaches. So if you combine together Indonesian and German experiences, then you see that is the importance of integrating the energy policies and then climate policies and that innovation policies. And the third message is during the coal phase out, government should consider incentivizing the deployment of renewable energy. It has to go parallelly, and that should be suitable to the country's power sector landscape and the innovation potential. So far, this innovation potential is very much limited in the global south. So for that, the countries need to be continuous in the technological innovation and diversification of the renewable energy base. And also these grids need to be made flexible and stable during this transition period. And finally, I think we need to look into this international cooperation, particularly where the countries can come together. One is the developing the renewable energy and the trading, both in the case of renewable energy and as well as the carbon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatachalam. Now I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Ajay Rastogi. Mr. Ajay Rastogi he has done a long stint in the Indian Forest Service, and he has held several positions. And presently he is the chairman of the task force on sustainable energy, just energy transition, green hydrogen mission, Jharkhand. And he is an experienced climate expert, and he has been representing the government of Jharkhand in various international conferences. Dr. Rastogi.
Thank you very much. I think I'm the last speaker, and a lot has been spoken by my earlier speakers. Regarding energy transition, I'd like to give you the brief view why Jharkhand has created this task force for sustainable energy transition. That will be the provincial view of the energy transition. See, the first and foremost importance for energy transition is for a state like Jharkhand and for a country like India, it is the energy security which matters. Because when you are developing, and we have a goal to be a developed country by 2047, our energy demand is going to increase by more than 3% per annum. So we have a challenge, and then we have an opportunity to develop from developing economy to developed economy. And the transition, as Mr. Arup Kumar has said, is going to be much easier for India because we cannot phase out, or we should not phase out the existing power plants or existing source of energy, but we can also develop, or we can also depend on new technologies. For India, recently we have seen in the world that prices are controlled, that fossil fuel prices are controlled by external world, they are not controlled nationally. So how to overcome? If you look at India's import bill on fossil fuel, it is around more than 20% of the entire import bill. If India has to be Atmanirbhar, then we have to rely on our self-reliant local technology, which is sustainable and which is equitable. As far as when we speak about Jharkhand, I will give you certain figures about Jharkhand. Many people may be aware. We are having 40% mineral reserve of the country, and we supplied 30% coal for the energy security of the country. And when we look at the energy development of the state, 98% energy comes from the coal. That is the fossil fuel. Contribution towards renewable is very, very less, though we have very good insulation. It is fifth best state in the country to have insulation, but we could not develop much solar. So while transiting from fossil to non-fossil based economy, I think for us, it is going to be very important that it should be just and equitable. When we talk about just, my previous speaker was talking about his experiences about just and equity. So it's not about the rehabilitation of formal worker in transition process. It is about the entire economic diversification plan, which is going to be very, very important for states. Developing new opportunities in greener job, or greener job are not as payable as that traditional energy sources, what we are doing now. So how to create a balance? The kind of a development, if you look at Jharkhand, we have 13 districts today out of 24 producing coal. We have 5 districts, their economy is dependent on coal. That is the steel which has come up. We produce a lot of crude steel and finished steel also. So way for Jharkhand is much different from any other state in India. It is going to be much more complex for us. When we talk about formal sector in Coal India, it's about 3.5 lakh people are only, they are on the payroll of the government of India. But when we go to the districts where mining started early, the informal economy which has set in around coal, it is much, much higher. That's much, much higher. So we need to take care of those people, those who are affected, those going to be affected by the transition, how it is going to be just and equitable. First, we need to assess. Then we have to plan. The planning is not attaining net zero is by 2070. So how to plan? It should be a short-term, mid-term, and long-term planning has to be there. Because the formal worker which are employed today will phase out very soon, because almost they're on an average, their age is around 40. So next 20 years, you may not see the formal worker if they have to phase out. But what about the entire ecosystem which is based on coal? That need to be mapped, and there has to be economic diversification plan for those. We may have to create, repurpose those areas which are going to be vacant, which are going to be available if mining is not sustainable. Because coal for India, I think even for Jharkhand, we need to have 3 tier planning. One is short term, that what we are Long term is mid-term could be that Jharkhand has 26% of the coal, but how can coal be a cleaner coal? How can we convert into liquid? How we can convert? There are processes available now. A lot of technological innovation is taking place. So mid-term, it could be a coal gasification could be the alternative for Jharkhand for moving towards a cleaner energy. Second, we have around more than 28% of countries CBD. So harnessing that CBD, that impact of coal bed methane is much lesser than the coal. India has around 2,600 billion cubic meter of CBD. Then if we harness even 10%, then India can save a lot of foreign reserve to the tune of, it is estimated about 2 billion USD can be saved. So if Jharkhand is having 30%, around 27% CBD, then it could be the real economic diversification for Jharkhand. See, the problem is not that simple. It's not about phasing out coal. It's not phasing about electricity. Greening the electricity, shifting from molecule to electron is not that simple for Jharkhand. We have a hard-to-abate industry in our state. And this the technology which is evolving today, it is not certain which technology is going to occupy which place. How to convert greener steel, how to make it economically viable, who is going to buy that steel? That cost which is estimated today, if we have to infuse hydrogen at today's rate, it comes to around 26,000 rupees per metric ton. Is additional cost is going to be added to the making a green steel. So where is the demand? Who is going to bear the demand? That is one. Second is we are the mineralized state. Transportation contributes a lot of emission, lot of carbon is utilized in transporting minerals. It's not only about coal, it is about iron ore, it is about bauxite, it is about copper. So if you do not tackle long haul vehicles, because electricity is not going to be the solution for, as the technological presentation and everybody know, world market is only 3 to 4%. So what could be the long-term solution for long-haul mobility? That is also going to be the key challenge for a state like Jharkhand, because we do not have a lot of networks where conveyors are being used. Now, Coal India has made announcement that a lot of investment will be done on conveyors. So they are trying to create that mobility more carbon friendly. But what about steel? What about bauxite? What about other minerals? Because the interstate transportation, you cannot rely on EV because the battery load is going to be very, very high. And hydrogen, of course, it is very promising, but the cost is skyrocketing. It cannot compete. It cannot compete. Even the technology is not certain. What kind of a technology is going to be there? That is going to be very, very important. And who is going to bear the cost? That is also very important, because transition is about the people, it's about the economy, it is about economic diversification, creating a new job opportunities, skilling and reskilling of the local people so that they get an opportunity to earn their livelihood. That is going to be the key. And who is going to, where is the concessional finance? Where is that available? How is state is going to access that kind of finance? That is also going to be a challenge for us. So just transition is about not only tackling coal phase out, it's not about electricity, it's about economic, it is about integrating economic development of any region or any country. That is going to be very, very important. How do we access those funds? Because we have been listening a lot that a lot of funds are available, but actually it is not coming where it has going to come. In the earlier session also, we see that some countries are blocking the fund, which were promised they could not reach to the developing countries. So mandate, what we are trying to do, we are not trying to focus on only on coal transition in our state. We are trying to create a recommendation like some other countries have already made, integrated approach for just inclusive and sustainable transition. And for Jharkhand, because we have more than 33% forest cover. So biomass will be the game changer for the state. Because the steel industry, they use a lot of, they are the biggest consumer of coal. If you take industrial sector wise, if you see that, bio-briquette with calorific value somewhere around 4,000 would be the game changer. Jharkhand produces a lot of hardwood, so it could be one. Designer char could be another one. Bamboo can be utilized. If we are able to phase out phosphorus from bamboo, then biofuel in bamboo is going to be the game changer for the Jharkhand. Another issue, like when we talk about transition, critical mineral is going to be very, very important. Because if you do not do sustainable critical mineral mining, and Jharkhand has all those minerals which are going to be very, very important for energy transition. We have copper, we have graphite, we have aluminum, we have iron. So these are going to be very, very important, and we need to develop a sustainable mining plan for these rare earth metals or the metals which are very important. Now graphene, I think is going to be the another future element. Jharkhand produces, it has the pride to produce highest lac production in the country. And second comes the Chhattisgarh. Graphene from lac is going to be the key for energy transition if it has to be carbon neutral. Because a lot of research has taken place, a lot of developments have taken place. Graphene can be produced from lac, because lac market has always been fluctuating in international market. Because farmers growing lac, they always been suffering. But once you convert lac into graphene, then there'll be a value addition, and we are the largest producer of graphite in this graphene lac in our state. So once we convert graphite into this lac into graphene, that is India is going to lead that energy transition, is going to change the entire ecosystem in that state. Because time is short, I'm just, yeah, I wanted to speak much. But the key takeaway for Jharkhand and from my side, from provincial government would be, while migrating from fossil-based economy to non-fossil-based economy, provincial states require a lot of hand-holding and support from Government of India and from international funding, so that it becomes just and it is acceptable to the people. As Mr. Alok Kumarji has also said, making commitment is also, we can make a lot of recommendation and commitment, but it has to be acceptable by the politicians and the people of the state. That is going to be very, very important for any state, and hand-holding. Because I see we do not have, a lot of states do not have capacity and capabilities. Those needs to be created within the state. It could be region specific, and regional cooperation like states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, regional cooperation will be very, very important for economic development for the entire area, because coal will definitely phase out after a certain time. It will lose its charm because it will become less economically viable. But these states which supplies coal to the country, and they meet energy security of the country, how do they develop? Like in Germany, in Rio, what they did, they started accelerated economic development started in those regions. So those kind of interventions, infrastructure development in those regions are required. That will be enabling provision. If it comes, that is going to be very, very important. And decentralized planning. That is because states, like if you compare Jharkhand from Chhattisgarh, it is quite different. Only one district produces coal as good as Jharkhand produces coal. The economy of Chhattisgarh may not be that much impacted by transition. So you need to have a state-specific approach. Then transition is going to be acceptable to the people and it is going to be equitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajarastogiji. This was a very effective presentation and you raised some of the state level issues very well. So we have completed the presentation by all the co-panelists. We are running short of time. So we will take maybe 3 interventions from the participant side. It could be question, it could be clarification, you could add something. So I will request if, please, you can introduce yourself and then make your intervention. Keep it brief and concise. Yeah.
Ek Jain, I'm from the urban sector. A compliment for very good presentations, very effective presentations, especially Mr. Alok Kumar. You gave an overview, and I understand it's very difficult when you are an insider to give a dispassionate view about what the government is doing and what should be done. My question is only very brief. You talked that the term green hydrogen is being changed to low carbon hydrogen, but IPCC and the COP 26, 27 and International Energy Agency, they are using this term. So will it not be conflict with the international practice? Yes.
No, I completely agree with you. See, G20 is a consensus forum. Even if a single member doesn't agree, then you can't proceed. So India is very proud of its national green hydrogen mission and will continue to promote green hydrogen. But I was telling, in the G20, there is not consensus on the word green. So to green, I was talking only about the G20 working group. The consensus is not there. So be it, no problem. But the beauty of the G20 process is that if you bring consensus, it's going to be very effective, very impactful. So let us agree to renewable energy and low carbon. I think it completes everything. And the most important thing I've mentioned, you must have paid the attention. If you are agreeing on a standard, which is like so many kilogram of carbon dioxide per kilogram of hydrogen to be qualified as the low carbon or green, your objectives are met. I think you will agree with me. So we have got some online interventions. I will take one which is, I'll read. If Nepal is not involved in the discussion of regional energy transition, the sustainable goal of renewable energy and energy efficient not fulfilled. What strategic policies should the developing countries like Nepal should focus for the sustainable development of the region? So this is one intervention. I'll only briefly respond. Recently, India has announced a long-term power trade agreement with Nepal for 10,000 megawatt in next 10 years. It's a very big movement, and it will supplement the India's energy transition, because if we import hydropower, we will consume the green power, and it will also enable the economic growth of Nepal. So it is not only India will export, it might also go to Bangladesh and other countries who are willing. So that's the importance of the grid, with what Gauri Singh ji was telling. Want to add anything?
No, I think it also just brings more to the point of regional integration, because small countries will not be able to really move the needle unless they can have aggregation at some level or regional integration with the larger countries. So I think it just supplements exactly what you've been saying.
I will take one last intervention.
I have a question.
I think, yeah, please go ahead.
I'm Rajan Walkar from NTDC. I'm looking after new initiatives. But what I'm saying is not pertaining to like NTPC or this. I'm giving my independent view. Like when some new technology is there, some startup develops something, but he's not able to scale up, or he needs say 10 lakh rupees or 20 lakh rupees. But as government or any other machinery, what we have, we are not able to give him right support at the right time. There are many technologies, even in India at this stage, we can produce ethanol from CO2 at 30 rupees per kg, but we cannot order for a single party which is not having some competition, like 2-3 minimum vendors are not there. Such things, if started in a starting stage, maybe some small investment will give so much returns that in 1 year we can have 10 crores of returns from that scheme itself, and it will multiply like anything. So this is, I have given one example, but there are so many.
You made your point.
Yeah.
I will only respond by two things. First, up to the board of NTPC to take a call, and no, just I'm not debating. They can always take some innovative procurement for budding technologies, like in Power Ministry, when we were in Power Ministry. So we had done a call for the startups. They can demonstrate their concept for application of artificial intelligence in the distribution businesses, and we were happy to nurture 17 of those startups. So it is always possible. It is happening all around us. So first thing that this says my nameplate Ministry of Power. I'm not the part of Ministry of Power now. This was just done. So this has been a very, very, very interesting discussion, a very effective session. I have jotted some points which I'll mention for the consideration of my co-panelists. If you want to drop anything or add anything, then maybe then we can finalize our recommendations for this session. First thing which come up very sharply is the electrification of industrial processes, if we have to promote more of renewable energy in the energy supply. Second, what Ms. Gauri Singh brought out is that most of the renewable investment is happening in the areas which are not really the high energy growth areas. So we need to push more aggressively the development of renewable energy in those areas which are going to see very rapid energy growth. Like India is trying to grow this 500 gigawatt. Third thing which came up is that grid interconnection is going to be very, very important if you want to integrate large quantities of renewable energy in the power system. Otherwise, will require huge storage requirements. Connected is the regional integration, which Gauri Singh just now mentioned, is very important for the smaller countries to drive their energy transition. One thing which came up from the presentation is that, like a Scotland experiment, that countries need to think and set up separate institutional mechanism to take care of just energy transition. It should not be left to the energy ministries, because energy ministries have a very, very focused and one-sided view. A more comprehensive institution at the government level through a commission or through a ministry is required, because this cuts across a lot of other sectors, socio-economic sectors, skilling and all. I also want to place this paying attention to local content for RE supply chain is going to be very important as we increase the area, the penetration of renewable energy. Otherwise, our greening will lead to a lot of imports, which will have a lot of implications for energy security, dependence, as well as for unemployment. Like we had a lot of ideas about the potential of biomass. Or Mr. Ajay Rastogi was also mentioning the biomass is one area which is like green hydrogen. Biomass is one area which has potential not only in for producing power, but also for transport, as well as for a lot of other applications which we need to take up. And the last point from my side is the hand-holding of states, and state-specific plans are very, very important, because if you want to take them board, acceptance, building up consensus will require a lot of state-specific action plans. So these are some ideas, points which came up during discussions, which I was jotting down, which could be if we all agree in the hall, which could be our recommendations for the G20 from this session. But I will invite my co-panelists, my one, if you want to add anything and to add anything to this. Yeah.
I think you captured it very well and all the key points. Just one thing when we are talking about the energy transition and it is going to G20 there it's diverged. And this transition should be people-centric. I think the Western thinking and the global South thinking is a different. They are developing the transition from the very different lens. That is my one point. And second point, I think it's related to our thing is that is the financing the transition. And here the technology window and the financial window need to open together and to make this transition happen at the scale required. And where there is a crowd financing could be mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You want to add anything? I think if we have Professor Jim Iskey with us still virtually, if he wants to add anything.
Yeah, maybe just make one very quick point. The last speaker mentioned economic diversification.
Sorry, you want to add? It's very nice to hear. You want to add anything about the recommendations from this session to G20?
Yeah. I'll just add one thing. The last speaker talked about the importance of overall economic diversification, and in Scotland, just to say, we talked about that on the Commission. Whether an overall industrial strategy should be developed to frame the just transition plans for sectors. And we decided not to recommend that specifically because we thought that government would take so long to produce an overall industrial strategy, the individual sectoral plans would be postponed far into the future. So if you were turning that into a recommendation, is don't let the best be the enemy of the good, and actually try to get on with activities where it's tangible and it's practical to do it.
Okay, thank you. I think we have come to the end of this session. I must thank all my co-panelists and all the participants. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists, for your valuable insights. Can you please come together for a group picture? Yes, thank you so much. Dear dignitaries, the lunch is served in Allure Hall. Please try to be back by 2:15 so that we have ample time for the next sessions. Thank you so much, everyone.